So hey anime fans. The series name is What If Naruto Got Harem with Residential Evil. So let's start the series. The third headmaster's eyes were filled with regret and sadness as he looked at the fleeing figure of his former sergeant grandson. Although he detested what he had just done, it was for the village's benefit, as was the case with most of his actions. When the door to his office was smashed so hard that it cracked, he hardly batted an eye. He bit his lip and sighed as he glanced down at a file marked LEF on his desk. When he opened it, he saw 7 pages, each of which featured a different Leaf member. All except one of them had a large red stamp that said, "Deceased." As he read over the papers, he saw that every one of the deceased had a specialty, including medical, demolition, Ken spirit, Tai spirit, Jan spirit, and Ni spirit art. With another sigh, he set those 6 aside and turned to the final one, Naruto, who was 14 years old, a special jonin, and the unit leader. In contrast to the other 6, he wrote, "Demoted," in large red letters with the words, "to Genin," in smaller ones. Following the unexplained deaths of the other members, the third headmaster disbanded the unit and discovered that Leaf stood for Lethal Efficiency Assault Attack Assassination Force, whichever you like. He initially believed it to be a small training organization that had adopted their community as its moniker, but things quickly began to seem odd. Lost chemicals, stolen lab equipment, and mutilated people who would be found weeks later. After the third headmaster sent his best ninjas to investigate the recent events, Leaf began to request missions, moving up from D rank to B rank in a couple of months that required spending a lot of time outside the village. Only after the deaths of the 6 Leaf unit members did things begin to make sense to him. Although he had no concrete evidence, Leaf was still under his control, so in order to prevent further harm, he disbanded it and temporarily released Naruto from active ninja duty. Third headmaster could assist in closing the file, but for some reason, there was a slight shudder. As he descended the several stairs of the Hokage's tower, Naruto snarled. The sense of impending doom he was giving off prevented anybody from disturbing him in the slightest. He was wearing what was once the Leaf unit outfit, which included knee pads and a pair of dull black combat boots that ended at the midcalf, tucked into black cargo pants. He was dressed in a black, unbuttoned long-sleeved battle coat with sleeves rolled up to his elbows, a white tank top with a short-sleeved fishnet shirt tucked into his pants, a metal tube underneath the shirt, and the Leaf unit patch, which was essentially the Hyde Ninja Village Leaf symbol but pointed down, with LEF stitched beneath it, on the right shoulder of his coat. He clenched his hands fiercely, causing his skin-tight leather gloves to squeak and strain. "Demote me to Genin, just because those 6 peons died," he thought heatedly. "After all I did for him and this piece of shit village." He slammed his fist against the wall, causing the bone in his hand to break and the wood to buckle beneath the force of the hit. "Shit!" he swore, clutching his fractured hand, which only made him more enraged. He inhaled deeply and relaxed. Leaf was referred to be an elite unit, and he was supposed to be its leader even though it had been disbanded, and he was the only one left alive. Since he was somewhat to blame for their deaths, he wouldn't lose his temper. In order to develop substances that would aid them in their ninja careers, Leaf had been secretly working with various chemicals for the 3 years they had been together. After learning of Naruto's super healing, they began devising a method to replicate it for the rest of the unit. Rewind. Along with the rest of his unit, Naruto stood over a row of tiny cages. They were all dressed in their uniforms, but unlike their leader, they were wearing simple masks that resembled the NBU. Little white lab mice were housed in the cages, and a little metal cart had a stack of syringes and several tiny bottles, each of a different color. The emotionless voice of Naruto said, "How close are we to stabilizing and getting rid of the virus's negative effects?" While filling the needles, the group's medical expert paused and set the needle down. "Out of the last 5, only 2 showed any promise, but over time they started to mutate and became very volatile, It was so bad that I had to eliminate the specimens. However, I took the two that worked and started changing parts of it. I'm about to test them now," the doctor informed them. As the medical expert inserted the needles into the mice's water bottles and administered the purplish experimental medication, Nuda nodded and folded his arms in admiration. He pondered which of the mice would react first as they began to sip the poisoned water. One of the mice began to squeak loudly after a few minutes, drawing everyone's attention to it. The mouse began to twitch violently and bang into the metal bars, and they all stared. One of the masked men gasped, "What the fuck?" and took an uncontrollable step back. The mouse abruptly stopped moving. The wound on its skull was healing, and Nerdus saw that its beady little eyes had turned from black to reddish-orange. "Which drug is this?" he asked. Compound RHC 014/VP009. While they were examining the other mouse, Nerda nodded and said, "Clear the cages, replace the mice, and start testing on multiple mice. If the results are the same, we'll start human testing." They began human testing on a civilian, and to their joyful surprise, the subject recovered fast. This seemed to indicate that they had successfully replicated Nerda's healing factor, so they killed the victim and began giving the medicine to the unit. They all displayed symptoms of excruciating pain when the medicine was administered. Their skin swelled and appeared to be crawling beneath it, and then their lips, ears, and eyes bled before turning the same shade of reddish-orange as the mice's. They initially felt ecstatic and divine, as if nothing could ever hurt them. Unfortunately for them, it didn't last long, since they all gave way and collapsed to the ground in agony as they were starting to adjust to their newfound strength. Slowly, Nuda retreated and ascended a flight of metal steps to the observation room. The steel walls of the medium-sized room were 4 inches thick, and the door could only be closed from the inside. Along with a few little seals, the chamber had a window on one side that overlooked the testing area. It was so thick that he didn't have to worry about it cracking or anything. Nuda sealed the door and moved to the window just as the sound of locks latching down was accompanied by the flashing of a red strobe light. Nuda's eyes opened as he looked out the window and saw these leech-like, human-shaped monsters scuttling around in search of an escape. He shakily and slowly reached over to a computer station, where he opened up a small glass cover to show a red button beneath it that read, "Area Purge." He shook his head, looked out at the monsters, and muttered a quiet, "Sorry," to his former allies before hitting the button. Returning to the window, he saw a series of tiny cylinders slide out of the ceiling, releasing a fine mist of extremely flammable gas that made the room appear foggy. The tiny cylinders slipped back into the ceiling and out again once the mist was dispersed. He turned back to the terminal and hit the button once more, causing the tiny cylinder to emit a tiny but powerful spark that ignited the space beyond the thick glass. The end of the flashback. Nerda's musings were abruptly interrupted when he almost ran over a young, dark-haired boy wearing a long scarf and his companions, a girl with orange hair and a brown-haired, snotty-nosed toddler wearing spectacles. The child with the scarf shouted, "Hey, watch it, you big lummox!" pointing at Nerda, who continued to walk. "Hey, I'm talking to you." Nerda ignored the little brat and continued to walk. In addition, he was too preoccupied with plans to avenge the elderly man. He whirled around as a pebble sailed past while he was leaning his head to the side. "Do you know who I am? My granddad at the Hokage, and I'll get him to arrest you if you don't apologize to me right now." Nerda glanced at the smirking child. He didn't like the stupidity and haughtiness that danced in his eyes. It didn't help the child either that he was the grandson of the old fool. A voice from the rooftops interrupted, saying, "Get away from the worthy grandson." Nerda recognized this person right away. "Well, if it isn't Ebisu," he muttered, crossing his arms and sounding bored. A blue-clad man leaped from the roof and landed between Nerda and the children. He only managed to say, "Honorable grandson, do not associate with street rats like him. when Naruto struck the man's skull with his fist, sending him flying into a wooden fence. Naruto crossed his arms once more and said, "Just because I've been demoted back down to Genin doesn't mean that my skills have gone down to Genin. I was a special Jonin for a reason." With horrified eyes, Hyde Ninja Village Emeru and his companions watched as their instructor failed to rise again. Due in large part to what he told them, they had always believed that Ebisu was the strongest and that they couldn't defeat him even if they banded together. The fact that this man, who was significantly younger than their sensei, had rendered him unconscious with a single stroke was astounding. Naruto turned on his heel and began to leave the three, leaving their sensei unconscious. But he became irritated upon hearing them chasing after him. "Hey!" he heard the boy with the black hair and scarf shout at him. With a menacing edge to his voice, Naruto halted and turned back. "What?" he said. While their friend and unofficial leader remained firm, the other two appeared to sense the threat in his voice and backed off. Over the squeaking of Naruto's leather gloves, he said, "You're a strong and beat sensei in one hit. How would you like the honor to teach me, the Hokage's grandson, and my friends?" "No," Naruto said in a quiet voice that sounded like freezing death. The two buddies of the brat sensed it, and started to worry about their friend's safety. "No?" asked Hyde Ninja Village Emeru, with a startled expression. "Who would decline the privilege of instructing the grandson of the Hokage?" "What do you mean, no? Do you know who I am? I demand that you teach me, don't make me Uarke." "Make you do what? Tell Granddad." "You arrogant little fuck, hiding behind his name and riding on his coattail, expecting everything to just be handed to you. It's fools like you that just piss me off," Naruto said, lunging forward and grabbing Hyde Ninja Village Emeru's neck with one hand, giving him just enough breath to stay conscious. "What are you done do, ha? Hit me! I dare you, when Granddad hears about this dash," was the only thing Hyde Ninja Village Emeru could to utter. Near the fallen special Jonin, Naruto drew back, slugged the boy in the stomach, and flung him sideways against the fence. "Pathetic little prick," he muttered, then turned to face the other two. "What about you two, anything to say?" he asked. With a swift shake of their heads, the young boy and girl stepped back. Naruto turned around once again and began to walk, but paused for a final moment to gaze up at the sky. The third headmaster almost passed out when he saw Naruto staring directly at him through the crystal sphere, and he groaned as he observed the entire event through his crystal ball. If he did all of that with the knowledge that he was observing, then Naruto was genuinely angry with him. After all, Naruto would often only use pressure points or nerves to quickly and painlessly knock someone out rather than take their breath away and toss them into a wall, a toddler no less. He began to doubt his choice to demote Naruto to Genin as he lit his pipe. Being demoted to the lowest rank was a serious setback to Naruto's pride in his abilities, as he was essentially called pathetic, slapped, and had his face spat in. He now understood why he had closed earlier. Naruto sought restitution for the humiliation of being demoted. From now on, he would need to exercise extreme caution. Hyde Ninja Village Emeru and his sensei both had their egos busted, so that's at least one positive outcome. After a couple days. "Kill that bastard for attacking the Hokage's grandson." Although Naruto made every effort to avoid the attacks, information of his home's location somehow leaked out, and the 5 ninjas who detested him chose to murder him for striking that little brat. He ducked under a blade, thinking, probably on the old fuck's orders. His wounds were still flowing and stinging, indicating that he had previously been struck quite a few times and that the blades appeared to be poisoned. He would normally have been able to avoid something like this, but today he let his guard down and was attacked in his lab after being disarmed. Everything seemed to stop abruptly, and the room's warmth seemed to vanish and be replaced by a freezing cold. He felt as though his leg, stomach, and chest were on fire. His body turned cold as he looked down. A blade covered in blood protruded from each of the 3 points. "Why you fuckers!" he exclaimed, losing his equilibrium as the blades were taken out. He felt his life passing him by as he staggered to the ground. His vision began to change from clear to fuzzy. "Come on, let's find a way out of here and let the poison take care of the rest," he overheard. "Yeah, I don't want to be here if the ambus show up." He found it difficult to stand as he heard footsteps farther away. "What the fuck?" he heard as he got up and staggered slowly toward the main computer terminal in the lab. He began typing on the computer, ignoring the pair, and the screen changed to a timer. A programmed female voice said, "Emergency self-destruct activated, all entrances sealed. And, please proceed to the emergency exit immediately. 7 minutes to go before self-destruction." As the frightened voices screamed and moved farther away, Nida smiled evilly and typed a few more commands. A notification stating that all emergency exits had also been sealed displayed. With a laugh, he dropped to the ground, grabbed his necklace, and snapped it off his neck. He removed it by twisting off the cap, revealing an inch-long needle that contained the RHC 014/VP009 compound. He began to lose his conscience after injecting himself with the purple liquid by sticking himself in the side of his neck. He certainly wasn't going to let the community off so lightly if he had to die. Why did the third headmaster perform a small victory dance atop his desk? He had just completed his paperwork, though. He was performing the pelvic thrust when his secretary entered the room with a stack of documents, followed by a chunin with a bigger stack. She asked, "Hokage-sama?" which caused him to pause and turn to face them. However, when he saw the piles of papers, he slipped and fell to the ground. "WHY, he cried, furiously slamming his fists to the ground. Boom! The papers fell to the ground as the tower trembled under the impact of the explosion. He scrambled to his feet and hurried to the window. "No," he said as he saw the building where he knew Nuda resided in ruins. A body and a black glove emerged from behind a steel support beam toward the top of the debris. Before opening its luminous silted red-orange eyes, the creature slowly rose up after crawling out from behind the metal. Nerdu, a scroll in his fist, staggered out of the flaming building. His clothes were burned, his coat was gone, leaving him in a shredded and bloody tank top. One leg of his pants was missing, and his naked leg was covered in blood, yet oddly, he had no wounds. He injected himself with the virus, became unconscious, and woke up less than 4 minutes before the place exploded. He used this time to compile as many of the chemicals, notes, and viruses as he could and turn them all into a scroll. He was unable to obtain them all, but he could get around that because, after all, he had assisted their medical specialist in creating some of the viruses. How difficult could it be to produce more using the instructions? After gathering everything, he went upstairs, but the place exploded before he could make an escape. Nida moaned uneasily, sensing something crawl beneath his skin, but chose to ignore it. He ducked into the first alleyway he came to while walking slowly down the street, fell to his knees, and vomited a sickening mixture of blood and green bile. "Fuck," he groaned, spitting out some of the blood that remained in his mouth. He cautiously got up after noticing a group of people sprinting down the street in the direction of his former compound. He spit again, rose to his full height, and vanished in a cloud of smoke. The third headmaster sat in his office, burying his face in his hands and letting out a sorrowful groan. 2 days had passed since the explosion, and they had gone through every piece of debris. Halfway through the second day, a number of horribly burned and unrecognizable bodies were discovered. They could only surmise that one of them was Nerda, and the others were fresh recruits to take the place of the other deceased Leaf members. Perhaps if he had done things differently, Nerda would still be there, and they would still be friends. The third headmaster felt a heavy heart and regretted everything. To make things worse, every time he turned his head away, his paperwork seemed to grow like rabbits. He was intrigued when he looked down at some of the reports and saw that they had discovered a number of burned notebooks and journals that they had sealed into scrolls. He opened one of the scrolls, pushed some core energy into it, and a little stack of journals materialized in a puff of smoke. He picked one up and examined the cover. It was severely burned, but the date was clearly visible in the center. 6 months ago, he thought, opening it to reveal a few pages that were burned and damaged. He flipped past them, found a decent page, and began to read. Journal entry. We're getting closer to our objective. I can sense that we're getting very close to figuring out how to stabilize it. In fact, the entire unit, especially the leader, can. He is largely responsible for my progress. After all, I would most likely still be starting from scratch if it weren't for his suggestion to utilize parasitic organisms as the virus's carriers. The third headmaster was unable to read the paper since the middle of it was burned. The parasite is known as a nifty little organism. We might be able to create a mind control medication with a few tweaks here and there. He asked himself. Mind control, what were you working on, Naruto? He discovered that he was unable to read the remainder of the page or make out the signature at the bottom. He discovered that it had been 3 days since the previous post when he turned to the following page. Journal entry. In all but one of today's testing sessions, compounds RHC-008 and VP-004 performed appallingly. Although the parasite is the most effective means of spreading the virus, there are certain unintended consequences. It appears that the virus changed the parasite, which changed the mouse significantly, and led it to be burned right away. At first glance, the mouse was healthy and appeared to have acquired our leader's ability to heal quickly. However, a few seconds later, it became extremely agitated and began attempting to break through the cage. The good news is that we now know the key indicators of a failed test, so we can be better prepared if this ever occurs again. Extreme agony, perspiration, shaking, bleeding from the eyes and ears, and in some severe cases, the parasite growing and visible crawling beneath the subject's skin, are the symptoms. Hakushi Fusen, medical specialist for the Leaf Unit. The third headmaster testified that Hakushi Fusen, one of the few physicians who viewed Naruto as a hero, was once among the best field medics Hyde Ninja Village had ever had. He was dismissed for assisting Naruto after he was attacked by a mob and hurt one of them. He lost everything when the hospital fired him due to pressure from the civilian council. He lost some of his sanity as a result and vanished, but not before he vowed to exact revenge on the village. Upon reflection, Leaf was established shortly after Hakushi vanished. With a sigh, the third headmaster set down the diary and grabbed another. In the small hotel room he had hired, Naruto gazed at himself in the mirror. In addition to being dilapidated, the hotel was most likely infected with thousands of different roach species, including those that had not yet been identified. A roach was most likely already in one of the pockets of his ripped and bleeding clothing, which was piled up in the corner. He didn't understand why he didn't transform into one of those leech monsters like the others, but he dismissed it, speculating that it was most likely because the virus was created using his DNA. Naruto stared at his body in the mirror. He no longer had any childhood scars, and the baby fat on his physique had been replaced with wiry muscle. He watched as the muscle beneath his skin flexed as he clenched his hand. He proceeded to a clothes store when he got to the small podunk town outside of Fire Country and bought himself some new attire and a pair of dark sunglasses to cover his eyes. He smiled malevolently as he recalled his shopping and educational experience. He had broken in and taken what he wanted, which was essentially the same items he had used to create the Leaf Unit suit, but without the reinforcement that comes with sunglasses to cover his eyes and high-level ninja attire. The shopkeeper approached him and threatened him with a bat as he began to leave the store with all the clothing he had stolen without paying. Surprisingly, the man was propelled out the door and into the streets as Nerda sidestepped the swing and gave him a mild punch to the gut. Nerda returned to the only other room in the bathroom and began getting dressed. After adjusting his shirt, he grabbed the sealing scroll that held the chemicals, equipment, and notes he had taken from the lab, slipped it into his jeans pocket, and vanished in a cloud of smoke. When they passed by, he had to go to Wave where they had prepared a smaller base. The experience in Hyde Ninja Village occurred 8 months ago. Nerdu was shocked to discover that the Leaf base had been overrun by some small-time criminal bosses named Gato thugs after he fled Hyde Ninja Village and traveled to the village of Wave. They destroyed furniture, broke through the concrete walls, amazingly, and converted some of the rooms into what appeared to be a cheap bondage porno film set. The lab, armory, storage, and his personal office, which contained reports from his spies worldwide and crucial documents like old mission files that could start wars and blackmail the majority of the key figures in Fire, Wind, and Lightning Country, such as the daimyos and their councils, were all inaccessible to them. What do you suppose they were doing, after all, when they were away from the oppressive village for several months? He seized the remaining thugs and used them as test subjects after using half of them to test his new abilities. After all, who would miss a samurai thug who enjoys frightening the village? With a few shadow clones who armed themselves with the thug swords, the base itself was simple to fix. The peons didn't object to cleaning up the mess they created, that is, until they witnessed one of their fellow thugs being disemboweled by Nerdu, who didn't even bother to use a sword, just his hands. A day later, the cheap bondage room had been dismantled and replaced with a true torture room. The walls had been repaired, and the majority of the furniture had been replaced. Everything appeared to be brand new. Insert nasty laugh here. Speaking of torture chambers, Gato was a dishonest shipping magistrate who enjoyed smuggling drugs and enslaving young girls. However, he was threatened by a bridge builder named who was constructing a bridge to the mainland. So Nerdu broke into the room a few hours after it was finished by torturing some of the thugs to learn more about the man. His stronghold on the island of Wave would be destroyed by something. Even though Nerdu didn't care all that much about the village, he thought it was dull and frequently needed something to do when he wasn't doing tests or research. He is now seen laughing evilly as he looks at his most recent spy report. It appears that Tozuna hired 2 squads of ninja from Hyde Ninja Village, led by Kurenai, the spirit art mistress, 6th headmaster, the copycat ninja, and Anko, the snake mistress, who used to be Nerdu's close friend. With another smirk, Nerdu released a spooky laugh that reverberated throughout his base's dim corridors, reaching the ears of the frightened goons who violently shuddered. At last, he had a task to complete, and he was determined to make the most of it. "Looks like I'll get to test out my newest creation sooner than I thought," he added, turning to face a group of metal cages. Nerdu's look caused the growl that came from the cage to abruptly halt and change to a whimper. Nerdu put on his black sunglasses, slicked back his hair, and went to the cages to retrieve a little scroll marked Inu. Even though Anko's day had begun well, with a big dango breakfast, 2 missing ninjas to question, and even the opportunity to beat up a pervert with curious hands, it wasn't going well. Given that she broke every bone in his hand, it goes without saying that he would not be able to beat off to anything for a long. Unfortunately, though, everything comes to an end. She was sent on a joint mission to Wave as backup alongside Kurenai and the 6th headmaster as punishment for breaking the civilian's hand. A pair of missing mist ninjas assaulted them near the boat that would transport them across the river into Wave. The little punk Uchiha insisted that she teach him the secret snake hand technique she used to destroy them. Zabuza Momochi, a missing ninja, attacked them after they crossed the river, but it wasn't a major issue at the time. However, they were currently being attacked and their limbs were being attempted to be bitten off by what could only be described as a pack of 10 canines who miraculously survived a meat grinder or one that was revived after months of decay. Zabuza and a masked ninja joined them in defending one another throughout the battle against the demonic dogs, claiming that only he could kill them and that his dignity would not allow some ugly-ass mongrel to defeat him before him. Ignoring Kiba's roar at the dog's rudeness, the dogs stopped and cried as a whistle suddenly reverberated across the clearing. They then ran to one side of the clearing and sat down in 2 lines of 5. A few minutes prior, as the 6 genin, 2 jonin, and 1 special jonin held their position against Zabuza, Naruto stood with his arms crossed on a low branch concealed by a cluster of leaves. When he was 12, he could have fought more fiercely than the high-level ninja in Hyde Ninja Village, and Zabuza appeared to have only begun to perspire. That made him shake his head. After removing the Inu scroll, he sprang down the limb and ventured into the forest. He then opened the scroll and used a spirit art summoning to call forth 10 of his most recent creations, diseased dogs. As they say, waste not, want not. They were once strays who were almost dead on the side of the road, but hey, he wanted to know what the virus would do to a dog. Once again, he attributed this to his DNA being in the virus, which made them incredibly nasty, attacking any living thing they saw save the other canines and only listening to Naruto. 10 infected canines snarled and were about to jump at him as the call smoke vanished, but they immediately lowered their heads and whined in Naruto's ominous look. Without saying a word, Naruto gestured toward the clearing where the Hyde Ninja Village ninjas were engaged in combat before vanishing in a flash of movement to return to the branch where he had been watching the performance. After seeing the dogs attack for just a few minutes, Naruto had more than enough information to conclude that the tests with the infected dogs were a total success. The hounds stopped attacking and fled in the direction of the tree Naruto was standing in as he put his fingers to his lips and blew a loud whistle. Greetings, was said in a chilly yet amused tone by Naruto after the dogs had seated in 2 lines. He then leaped from the tree, still concealed by a big bush, and moved carefully into the clearing. It's been a while, 6th Headmaster, Kurenai, Anko, how've you been? He said, grinning as he approached them slowly and halted just behind the 10 dogs. Sakura looked fearfully at the blond man and his dogs, before asking, Sensei, do you know him? Since the children are the future, Naruto took it upon himself to learn their names. If he hadn't begun Leaf, he would have been in their graduating class. No, I don't, the 6th headmaster said, looking at his pink-haired pupil with bewilderment in one uncovered eye. Do I? He asked, glancing at the all-blonde, slicked-back hair, mirrored spectacles, and all-black attire that seemed oddly familiar. Oh, don't tell me that you forgot about me, he said. How about this? He remarked, sighing and shaking his head in response to their bewildered and perplexed expressions. He then took his hand and messed up his hair, causing it to spike. He remarked, Remember me now, Inu-chan, you perverted little shoe humper, as he saw the hunting ninja and Zabuza vanish. Kurenai and Anko snickered at the moniker, and the genin burst out laughing. No way, you're supposed to be dead, the 6th headmaster said, his eyes widening. Naruto slicked his hair back and said, You should know, 6th headmaster. He mumbled the last bit. It takes more than an explosion to kill me, well, fully at least. Wait, Naruto, is that you? Anko inquired slowly after realizing what had happened. She was devastated by Naruto's passing because he was one of the few people who treated her with respect and didn't call her derogatory names or even tried to have sex with her. When she was in trouble for the same incident that led her on this trip, he supported her and treated her kindly. His smirk is even better than mine. I'm sorry, but I'm not following his train of thinking, it goes against all my morals, said Naruto, grinning his sinister smirk, making his companion envious. Naruto began. Yes, Anko, it's M-, before his companion interrupted, saying, Fight me. The Uchiha was viewed as an idiot by everyone, including the dogs. The 6th headmaster began. Naruto friend, he's too strong for you to fight, he was dash. Fight me. Naruto's friend interrupted, saying, So, who cares what he was? It's not like he could defeat an elite like me. The grown-ups gulped as Nerda said, Sixth headmaster, I think you need to teach you students some manners. That wasn't good. Even the genin began to perspire, and Kiba, Shino, and Hinata placed a wager on how long Nerda's companion would battle before he perished. Nerda's companion threw a kunai at Nerda's head and said, Don't talk like I'm not here, you fool, fight me. In a stunning display of power, Nerda flattened the tip after catching the blade with his thumb and index finger. He said, You will regret that. And then he clenched one hand, ripped the leather glove at the knuckles, and threw the kunai into the air. Nerdu's friend followed the blade with his eyes because he had no experience battling an opponent like Nerdu, who wouldn't just stop and allow himself get hit like other academy teachers, committing the error of turning your back on the adversary. Nerdu ran ahead, leaving a trail of 7 pictures in his wake, and struck his friend's stomach with his fist, sending him hurtling into a tree with a trail of blood and spit behind him. When Nerdu heard, Enardio friend Keien, from the side, he turned his head to the side and avoided another kunai that Sakura, the girl with pink hair, had thrown at him, leaving behind what appeared to be an afterimage of black smoke. Nerdu lied, saying, Fine, I can see when I'm not welcome, but we will meet again, before hurling a black smoke bomb and using his own version of the sunshine, which left behind matching black smoke. Nerdu sighed and crossed his arms, saying, I come here to have a nice conversation, and here I am being attacked by your students. Sakura asked her sensei, Sensei, who was that? She was still furious with the blonde man who had injured her, Nerdu Frenkuen, and wanted to exact revenge on him. The 6th headmaster, who was holding the unconscious Uchiha, turned to face Sakura and saw that, with the exception of Sai, every other genin had turned to him in curiosity. That was Nerdu, he used to be a special jonin and the leader of the Leaf Unit, he said, sighing as he resumed his stroll. Leaf? Kiba asked inquisitively, nodding his forehead. What's that? Kurenai responded to her own pupil's inquiry by stating, Leaf was an elite unit, comprised of 6 ninjas who were experts in their field, and Nerdu as their leader. Not much is really known about them all. However, she also raised numerous other. Happy that one of her buddies was still alive, Enko nodded enthusiastically. And an even lesser-known fact is what Leaf means. Kiba rolled his eyes and said, What, and you do? Yep, the lethal, efficiency attack force, she remarked, childishly putting her tongue out. Almost dropping his book, the 6th headmaster asked, How do you know that? Well, she said childishly, if the Hokage hadn't disbanded Leaf along with that explosion, I would have joined. A few weeks prior to that whole mess, Nuda sent me an invitation saying that my torture and interrogation skills would be appreciated. Everyone looked at Anko's question, and she gave them a smug look. Time jump, a couple of days after. Gato was anxious as he sat in his office since the superiors who had given him authority to manage Wave's activities were coming to check on him. If the mafia he worked for discovered that he was responsible for the village's poor state, or that some unidentified individual was murdering his mercenaries, he was screwed. The mafia he worked for was among the oldest and still adhered to many of the ancient customs. He poured himself a drink, took it up shakily, and drank it down. He sat the glass on the table and flinched when a dark-haired man in a black suit entered through the open door. He stood to welcome the higher-up, thinking, God help me. A lighted cigarette hung limply from Nuda's lips as he stood emotionlessly as growls reverberated through the village's forest. As he watched his dog rip into the bodies of some thugs who thought it would be fun to attack him, he yawned in boredom. He would have to replace one of the dogs that had been sliced in half by their lead thug, but they were also pretty good. He adjusts his sunglasses and puffs on his cigarette. He had never smoked much before, mainly when he was extremely irritated or waiting for something similar to what he was now. To be honest, he attributed his smoking habit to their demolition specialist, Kichigai Bakugeki. According to the account, one day while they were waiting for a mission to begin, Nidu started fidgeting in frustration. Kichigai ordered him to calm down and gave him one of his cancer sticks, which he usually carried with him. Following that, Nidu relied on Kichigai to provide him with cigarettes in case he needed them. However, after Kichigai's death, Nidu was able to obtain the bomber's cash, which, oddly, consisted of just one pack of seals that filled it when it was empty. Many issues that arose over the years were clarified by that. Nidu threw the butt on the ground after finishing the smoke, unconcerned by the sounds of tearing flesh or crunching bones. He had become somewhat of a legend among the locals during the time he had been in jail and had begun killing thugs, leaving their half-eaten bodies for villagers or other thugs to find wherever they were. Unknown to everyone until it was too late, a man with a pack of man-eating dogs ruthlessly murdered Gato's thugs before going missing. Museakuma, Silent Devil, and his pack of Oni-Inu, demon dogs, were named by the villagers shortly after the initial deaths. Although he was aware that by allowing the individuals he saved to survive, his name, or more accurately, an alias that suited the way he killed, would become well known across the hamlet, it seemed as though he had transformed into a superhero in the eyes of the locals. Was Gato truly this cruel to them? They would hug the first person to deal Gato a severe blow to his alleged business, since they were so avaricious and unscrupulous. His words, dispel, caused the 9 hounds and the deceased, deader, to puff into smoke. Now that he knew where one was, he turned around and began to make his way to one of Gato's outposts, from where the group of swordsmen had come. Gato was determined to make amends for the misery his minions had caused him. Nidu stopped outside the compound doors and was stopped by 2 men with swords. "What the fuck do you want?" the inconsequential swordsman inquired. "Nothing much, just this," Nidu said, adjusting his shades and flexing his hands, causing his gloves to split slightly. Then, he struck the first man in the nose with his fist, turning the cartilage into a rocket that killed him by shooting it into his brain. When Nidu heard a sword being unsheathed, he ducked forward, allowing the blade to pass over him and clatter against the door. Nidu got to his feet, seized the last man's arm, and raised it over his head before hitting the thug in the chest and extracting his heart. With a choked gurgle, the man collapsed to the ground, trying in vain to reach his heart and survive. With a cruel sneer, Nidu knelt down and put the heart in the deceased man's hand before kicking the door and causing it to fall with a loud thud. When the group of 8 goons and about 5 ominous-looking women turned to see who had kicked down the door, they saw only that one man. A man who was sitting on a chair and harassing one of the women demanded, "Who in the hell are you?" Before he entered and broke down the door, Nidu remained silent, unable to address the men who were probably raping the women. The room erupted in smoke without Nidu twitching, causing the men and women to begin coughing as the heavy smoke entered their lungs. The chamber soon began to clear, and animalistic howls filled the space in place of smoke. Everyone gasped when the smoke finally cleared from the chamber, realizing that the man with the sleek blonde hair and black mirrored sunglasses was the Museakuma and his Oni-Inu. While the women began to experience hope that had perished along with some long-lost fangirl inclinations that had purportedly died once adolescence had run its course, the men felt as though their hearts had fallen to their balls and stopped beating. Nidu told his dogs to kill the men. Without hesitation, the disfigured canines charged at the 8 men, who flung the women to the ground as they scurried to protect themselves from the dogs' attacks. Although the actual fight was brief, it was incredibly nasty. The ladies he rescued at last realized why his canines were referred to as devils and why he was known as the Quiet Devil. Parts of the bodies they killed were consumed by the dogs as they tore the men apart, tearing and crushing their skin and bones. Some of the women fainted, while others puked in the corner due to the sight's excessive blood and gore. Nidu shook his head, asking if all of Gato's punks were murderers and rapists. As he looked at the women, he considered the other people he had spared. Well, they were merely there, and he had saved them by killing the swordsman, so they saw him as a kind of God-sent hero. He couldn't help but consider the alternatives that were presented to him, even though it wasn't the intended outcome. He told the women to leave, and they hurriedly staggered out of the room. He thought to himself, well, it's like they say, to the victor goes the spoils, before chasing the dogs away and creating a group of shadow clones who all wandered around the area, inspecting the few rooms and the dead for anything significant. A stack of orange books, several inexpensive swords, and a little amount of cash were the only valuable items the clones discovered. Jackpot. When the third headmaster felt like screaming and smashing something, the council had the brilliant idea to search through the more classified papers in the archives and discover Naruto's file, which contained the names of his parents, Minato Namikaze and Kushina. They began screaming for him to be located and returned to his proper home as soon as they recovered from their shock. Demon 1 minute, hero the next, it was incredible. Even when they told the town about it, their response was essentially the same, with the exception that it took them barely a moment to recover from the shock. He now had to deal with all of this paperwork, mission scrolls about getting Naruto back, and ninjas who volunteered to go find their hero and return him. In addition, clan leaders who wished to have the Namikaze bloodline blend with their own proposed marriages. With its high affinity for all elements and the inability to use the Fourth's Flying Thunder God technique without it, the Namikaze bloodline was definitely something to kill for. He grabbed his desk and threw it out the window along with the pile of finished paperwork, giving way to his rage at the council. His hand reached for the desk, but it was too far away when he noticed this. He sobbed, "NOWHHHYYYYY. It took me forever to finish that," before scuttling to the side of the room and forming a fetal posture while sucking his thumbs. Gato didn't waste any time discarding something, in contrast to the third headmaster. However, he had to settle with a bottle of his most expensive sake, which cost about $10,000 a bottle, because he was too little to throw his desk. He was furious because that motherfucker, the Museakuma, had slain all of his mercenaries in his eastern base and released the women. The mafia man dispatched to investigate the wave was run over by those women, and he halted them and inquired as to what had transpired. Now that the boss himself was coming down, he was in serious trouble. He fervently hoped that he would survive the days following the boss's visit, and if he did, he would annihilate the so-called Silent Devil, just as he would have the Demon of the Bloody Mist, after he had murdered the bridge builder. He took a deep breath and soon began to relax. He froze when he sat down in his chair and peered out the open window. With big cartoon tears, he shouted, "No, my sake!" and reached for the window. Naruto was strolling around Wave's streets at night. The hamlet appeared to be too small, with trash piled up in the alleys and bums still sitting on the streets. He felt something approaching him as he passed a bigger structure and reached out to grab it. He thought, "What the fuck?" as he caught a big bottle. He was nearly upset when he couldn't identify the person who tossed it so he could jam the bottle down his throat, but his disappointment soon gave way to surprise when he realized what the bottle contained. "Bribe me all you want, Cammy, but I'm still going to unleash hell upon the world," Naruto said, narrowing his eyes as he looked up at the gloomy, dark sky. Cammy, lying on her stomach and peering over the edge of a cloud, moaned, "Me damn." A man approached and looked down with her, asking, "What's wrong, Cammy-chan?" "Oh, I'm just trying to stop Naruto from destroying Fire Country." "How about you, Shinigami-kun?" Cammy said, letting out a sigh and supporting her head on her palm. He looked at the woman, who blushed a little, and replied, "Nothing much. Hey, did you just try to use sake to bribe him?" Threateningly, she said, "Yes, so what? Nothing, but what now since that failed? The death god said, swiftly waving his hands to avoid upsetting her. Oh, you'll see, I have a backup plan. She smiled. The sake was among the greatest in the world, and Naruto felt sorry for whoever had lost it. He removed the cork from the bottle and took a tiny taste. He kept walking down the street when he felt something approaching him once more. 2 days have gone by since Naruto destroyed Gato's east base and unintentionally made it known that he has the ability to resurrect the dead and transform them into monsters. He didn't want it out in the open just yet, but it didn't alter the villagers' perception of him. In actuality, it was his fault. He had forgotten about the woman who had fainted when he urged the others to go. Therefore, he didn't realize the girl was awake until it was too late when he conducted a field test on a dead body with a more resentful virus. He was unable to kill her because it would likely raise unnecessary questions, and he was also unable to hold her captive because of the same issue. Since it was his only choice at the moment, he simply let her go. He was currently enjoying a plate of fugu, also known as blowfish or pufferfish, with a side of dango at a small restaurant in the village's somewhat nicer area. In addition to the fact that he has eaten worse cuisine for 3 times the price, it was little pricey but still tasted good. He used his chopsticks to pick up some of the fugu, put it in his mouth, and chewed the raw fish. His unexpected "Hello, Anko-chan," caused the shadow behind him to start perspiring. "Fugu?" he asked, gesturing to the plate as she moved from behind him and settled into the seat in front of him. Anko cocked an eyebrow at Naruto after glancing at the fish and said, "Isn't fugu poisonous?" "Very," was all he said, causing her to perspire once more while Naruto nodded and ate another piece. When she refused to accept the fish, he gently said, "Dango?" just before the 2 sticks he had left vanished and then resurfaced in her palm. After saying, "If you insist," she began to munch them down. Anko let out a sigh after the 2 ate their meal in pleasant silence for some time. She asked abruptly, "Why do you wear those sunglasses?" Naruto almost choked on his fugu, but he cleared his throat to make sure it went down the proper pipe. He chuckled to himself. "Of all the things you could have asked about, though, I wear them to hide my eyes." "Hide your eyes?" Anko asked him, repeating, "Why would you want to hide your eyes?" "Here, I'll show you," he said, grinning slightly at her. Anko gasped when he saw Naruto's silted orange eyes as he slowly reached up to his sunglasses, clutched the side, and pulled them off. She looked directly into his eyes and said, "What happened, Naruto-kun?" She didn't freak out like he expected, which surprised Naruto a little. "I guess she really does care about me," he thought to himself, grinning. Before he triggered the self-destruct, he informed her about being ambushed by the 5 ninjas and almost dying because he trusted her. Astonished by his survival, Anko questioned, "How are you still alive? That blast should have killed you." Missing her shocked expression, he smirked and said, "Well, Anko-chan, before my men were killed we were working on a way to transfer my healing ability to the unit," reaching into his pockets. As he dug into his pockets, she asked, "And what? They tried it, and it didn't work." Naruto discovered what he was looking for and took out a little metal tube, removing the cap. He turned the tube up, set the tip next to his spectacles, and a tiny syringe with a plastic top dropped into his gloved, open hand. Holding the purple-filled needle, he remarked, "Quite the opposite, actually," adding, "It worked, well, for a while at least." "Huh." Sighing, "While it worked, we had to use a parasite to make sure the virus wasn't killed by the body's natural defenses before it could take effect on the host, but we didn't plan on the virus mutating the parasite, which would do the same to the host except for me since it was my DNA used to make it. Take those dogs, for example." The thought of the dogs made her wince. They were repulsive and had caused the genin to have nightmares. She was thinking about the pets when she had an epiphany. So what's with the silent devil thing? She questioned, using her fingers to create quotation marks. I never took you for the hero type. I'm no hero, they just saw me killing thugs and destroying Gato's business out of revenge and boredom. I can't help it if they thought I was trying to help them, Naruto said, raising an eyebrow at the weak remark. He then picked up a small clay cup filled with sake and drank it. Anko asked. So it was just a coincidence, as he played the dango sticks. Pretty much, Naruto remarked as he abruptly got up from the table. Well, as great as it was seeing you again, Anko-chan, I have to go. After putting on his glasses, he took out some yen notes and placed them on the table. Oh, and my offer to join still stands, he said to her as he turned to leave. He then picked up a black trench coat from the peg near the front and vanished out the door. Naruto straightened his coat and strolled down the deserted street, laughing darkly to himself. He was eager to do what he was about to do. Killing thugs was somewhat entertaining, he had to admit, but he knew exactly whose genin would provide the greatest amusement, and the thought of fucking with some genin sounded like water to a man in a desert. He leaped up to the roofs and vanished, leaving only a pair of crimson lines where the eyes were in a blackish afterimage. Uchiha, a friend of Naruto, snarled to himself. He kept thinking about how strong that blonde guy was and how he had lost to him. He needed that power, not that clanless loser. He didn't see the orange eyes staring at him from another tree behind him as he ran up the tree. The irony of their earlier encounter, in which the Uchiha essentially asked that Naruto provide him his power and believed that he was an elite, while he was still using basic core energy management techniques, made him shake his head as he watched the youngest Uchiha run up and down the tree. Since he was barely concealing his core energy signature, he crossed his arms and waited for the Uchiha to see him. After all, any elite, deserving of his rank, should be able to detect it. While running up and down the tree, Naruto's pal kept stumbling and slipping. Naruto had to question how he was able to join a C-ranked assignment, but he dismissed it as the ignorance of the people that attempted to murder him. Getting bored of waiting for the genin, Naruto stealthily walked down the tree using the technique that Naruto's friend was struggling with. You know, for you to be a so-called elite, Hyde Ninja Village's standards must be slipping, Naruto stated, crossing his arms in an attempt to draw a raise out of him. His kunai, which he was using to track his progress, fell off the tree and landed on his face as his Naruto comrade jumped in surprise. Skittish too, are you sure that you're an elite? Naruto asked, cocking his head to the side. You, a Naruto buddy growled and smirked. Finally realized what an honor it is to teach Uchiha. He lifted himself off the ground and glared. Teach you? Asked Naruto. What on earth would I want to teach you? On the inside, Naruto smiled evilly. He was correct. This was enjoyable. I demand that you teach me, Naruto's pal called out. He was Uchiha, and nobody refused him anything. Or what? Naruto buddy instantly took a step back. His voice was icy and bitter, bringing back memories of the Uchiha bloodbath. In a matter of seconds he was experiencing swift, vivid flashbacks of his brother. Only through hatred will you ever grow strong enough to kill me, dumb little brother. He heard the voice of his brother. He hasn't even done a spirit art or anything and I can barely move. I should be able to do that, not him, said Naruto's companion as he snapped out of it. Naruto smiled a little, which made his friend angry. Teach me now, I deserve that power, not you. You belong at my feet like the pathetic dog you are, a buddy of Naruto said. The words, you insignificant bug, I let you off easy last time. But now I'm going to make you wish you were never born, replaced Naruto's smile with a sarcastic sneer. His pal was thrown back into the tree he had been practicing on after he barely had time to blink before a punch dug into his cheek. Hitting the tree, Naruto's friend grabbed his face in pain and looked back up only to duck just in time to evade Naruto's fist. Nerdo's friend's eyes widened as he saw the tree bark split into bits where the punch had landed. Grabbing for his kunai pouch, he picked a handful and flung them at Nerdo in hopes of killing him. His dreams were unfortunately crushed as Nerdo moved more rapidly than a human should, sidestepping and bending out of the way, leaving behind only a blackish afterimage that would vanish as quickly as smoke. He should not have thrown all of his kunai at once, and he was missing his other equipment, so he cursed as he reached for another kunai Nerdo buddy and felt nothing but air and lint. Taking advantage of his friend's ignorance, Nerdo swiftly moved in his direction and seized him by the nape of his neck. "I hate people like you," Nerdo growled, gripping his friend's neck tighter and lifting him slightly off the ground. "What are you going to do, huh?" asked Nerdo's friend, kicking and wriggling as he fought against Nerdo's hold since he still thought he was superior to Nerdo. After releasing his friend's neck, Nerdo swiftly backhanded him, causing him to fly across the clearing and land with a thud in the center. Just before a black boot struck his already bruised face and sent him back through the clearing and into the tree where he had been practicing the tree walking exercise, Nerdo's friend, who was attempting to move, barely heard the footsteps approaching and turned over to see Nerdo standing in front of him. Nerdo approached Uchiha, who was lying on his face and grunting. When his Nerdo companion turned and stabbed his leg with the kunai he had dropped when he fell from the tree earlier, he grunted in surprise and pain as he was flipped over with a foot. Even though the wound would heal rapidly, it still stung like a bitch. "You little prick," he growled. Nerdo kicked the kunai out of his hand, stood on his friend's neck, and began strangling him, perhaps crushing his windpipe and choking him to death. His vision began to blur and darken as his lungs burned and he cried for breath. His companion did everything he could to shove the blonde's foot off his neck, but it was like attempting to move a boulder. He kicked and tried to holler, but was unable. "This can't happen, I'm supposed to kill Itachi, not this, I can't die here," he thought for a moment. He was able to breathe deeply all of a sudden. He glanced up at the blonde and noticed that he was frowning toward the trees. Nerdo felt two figures approaching them at a moderate speed. "Looks like you get to live another day, Uchiha, luckily for you," he said, frowning as he turned to face the Uchiha again. "But I cannot allow you to tell anyone about this, lest it ruins my plan," he continued, creating some hand seals and utilizing a spirit craft to erase the memories of his one-sided struggle with Nerdo. Nerdo stepped back from his wide-eyed companion, who was still dazed by the spirit art, and kicked him in the face, dislocating his jaw and knocking him out. Nerdo picked up the bloody kunai, pocketed it, and moved away from the presences he sensed, leaving his companion comatose on the ground, having been severely beaten and bleeding from the lip that Nerdo had kicked. Nerdo leaped up into the woods and vanished into the night as they reached the edge of the clearing. With a sigh, Kiba followed Shino down the dirt path illuminated by the moon to the training clearing. The sixth headmaster would have gone, but his book was seen to be more necessary at the time. They had been requested to go tell their Enardio acquaintance that it was time for dinner. Kiba was unnerved as they strolled along because he could see how silent the little woodland was at night. With the exception of the occasional cricket, Waves was nearly calm, in contrast to the forest of Hyde Ninja Village, which was nearly constantly alive with activity and noise from ninja training. Shino had the same feelings as Kiba, but he chose not to express them. His insects were warning him to turn and return to Tizuna's place, which was safer, rather than the stillness itself. The quiet was broken by Kiba's quiet voice saying, "I don't like this." Slowly nodding, Shino said, "I agree, my bugs are telling me to leave, but," before halting and entering a clearing. When Shino and Kiba noticed that Nerdo's companion was lying in a heap on the forest floor in the clearing, their eyes grew wide. When they saw the huge black and gray bruise that covered the entire side of his face, they ran over and grimaced. Kiba said, "Come on, let's get him back to Tizuna's house. taking his companion Naruto in his arms and running off to the bridge builder's house. It would be more accurate to characterize Orochimaru's office as a throne room. As he considered the intel he had just received from one of his ninjas a few minutes prior, a sly smile turned on his face. His curiosity was piqued when the first ninja informed him of a ninja who was said to be able to bring the dead back to life and make his slaves live in the tiny village of Wave. He was informed by the next that Naruto, the former leader of the Leaf Squad, was in Wave. After all, he was referred to as the best Sannin of the three, so it didn't take long to figure it out. He chuckled and made plans to send one of his ninjas to see the youngster and offer him a position in his community. He entered a bizarre, dreamlike state as the idea of using the youngster to build an army of the dead to destroy Hyde Ninja Village flashed through his mind. Sakura yelled, "Naruto friend Quinn!" from outside, startling everyone inside the house. Sakura was waiting for her Naruto friend to come back so she could dine with him because she was a huge fan. She must have been shocked when Kiba and Shino ran toward the home and pulled her pal along with them. The first person outside was the sixth headmaster, whose eyes startled, and he dropped his book. "What happened?" he questioned hastily, removing the wounded lad from the two. Kiba responded, "I don't know, we found him like this," and Shino nodded in agreement. After giving them a quick nod, the sixth headmaster hurried inside, almost missing Anko as she went outside to investigate the disturbance. Anko was the only person who saw the black-clad, blonde-haired, red-eyed figure reclining on a tree with his arms crossed and a slight smile on his face amid all the turmoil. "Naruto?" Anko was pushed back when the pink-haired fangirl rushed past her to follow sixth headmaster, who was carrying Naruto's companion inside, after she had been staring at him from the doorway. Giving the girl a fierce look, she glanced back up and blinked in perplexity. Naruto had vanished. She turned and returned to the dinner table, blinking a few more times as she listened to Kiba and Shino tell their sensei and Hinata how they found a Naruto buddy, while Sakura continued to question the sixth headmaster about the friend's whereabouts. She ignored them and began to think. She was aware that Naruto was probably the one who severely abused her pal. That little jerk was the most obnoxious bastard ever, constantly requesting that someone teach him spirit art or some other skill, but she didn't really care. She was curious as to what her Naruto friend had done to deserve such a pounding. She was aware, after all, that Naruto was not the type to forgive and would take advantage of any chance to exact revenge. When she put a bowl of soup in front of Tsunami, she mumbled, "Thanks." While idly tinkering with the soup, Anko began to consider Naruto's invitation to accompany him. On the one side, she would be reported missing, pursued by hunter ninjas, and most likely killed. On the other hand, she would be able to leave the village that detested her, join someone who would value her and not disparage her behind her back since her sensei had left the village and most likely learn a lot of new things. She silently sighed and gazed into her soup, oblivious to her longtime friend Kurina's anxious expression as she looked at her. We find Naruto idly walking down the dirt path toward the better part of town to get him something to eat before heading out to find more test subjects to replace the ones killed by an unintentional viral outbreak in the lab area while he was away due to some damn rats that knocked over a bunch of test tubes filled with the stuff, infecting themselves and some other rats, causing some major mutations. When he entered the lab, he was shocked to see that the thugs who had been turned into test subjects were being eaten by a gang of rats the size of small dogs. Really, they were at blame for drawing the bugs. The state in which the base was in before to his arrival essentially invited the small-time criminals to take it. To capture the not-so-little pricks, he required some fierce traps. He fixed his glasses as he approached the tiny eatery/bar and opened the door. He retuned it after receiving a courteous nod from the owner, and took a seat at his regular table in the shadowed corner. "The usual?" the proprietor/cook asked his best and only client. Naruto gave the man a nod, then slung his coat over the back of his chair and waited quietly for his dinner to be delivered. He crossed his arms as he noticed that it was about 8:30 on the clock. He reasoned that it would happen eventually because this was one of the few locations that punks and thugs hadn't attempted to loot or shake down yet. It also helped that he had just heard several of them plotting to rob the establishment. "Here's your fugu and dango." As the man set the dish and a bottle of sake down in front of him, Naruto slowly turned his head in his direction. He took some cash out of his wallet, paid for the meal, and ate leisurely while he awaited the arrival of his new test subjects. Naruto summoned the proprietor halfway through his dinner, as 3 men with swords entered the room. "Yes, sir, how may I help you?" he said courteously. He didn't want to lose Naruto's business because, aside from the purple-haired woman who bought out half of his dango in the establishment, he was his best and only true client. Naruto silently took a tiny envelope out of his pocket and handed it to the man. He said, "Here," before grabbing his final dango and consuming all 3 at once. "What is this?" the man said after opening the package and gasping at the sum of money inside. "What did you give me this for?" he inquired. "So you can replace your chair's door, window, and clean the floor," Naruto said, glancing at the man before hurling the sharpened stick at one of the men, striking him in the arm and causing him to scream in agony. The wailing man was silenced when Naruto tossed the chair next to him across the room, ignoring the agonized cries. Fearing an attack, the shopkeeper had fled and leaped behind the bar. He clenched his eyes as the sound of glass shattering objects and painful gasping reached his ears, but it ceased as soon as it began. There was utter silence for a second before his head broke through the counter. The floor was covered in blood, half of the chairs were in bits, the window was smashed in, the passengers were gone, and the door was vanished. WTF? Sitting at the table, the 6th headmaster studied his book with little enthusiasm. Reflecting on his failures to his sensei and, now, to both of his colleagues. He murdered himself out of shame after first failing his sensei, the guy he considered a second father. He let him down by neglecting his kid Naruto and becoming engrossed in his literature, ignoring the beatings and mobs that made him into a truly high-level ninja who was perhaps even worse than Nine Beast. Cold, effective, and indifferent to human life as long as the task is completed as required. In retrospect, he held himself responsible for Naruto's development ever since that day, Naruto's 10th birthday. Then he let Rin, the girl he was beginning to like, down. He began reading that smut, Ika Ika, Paradise, because of her passing. He lost himself in the book to forget her agonized cries after she was stabbed in the chest by an enemy ninja close to the end of the conflict. By abandoning his Naruto companion to train alone and allowing him to be severely assaulted, he had now let Toby down. Along with repositioning his jaw, he was able to reduce the bruises and repair some of the lesser injuries with his meager medical spirit arts skills. Fortunately, he was also unconscious. The 6th headmaster had to forcefully snap his jaw back into place because he was unable to numb it. He ventured a bet that the genin would be out for the remainder of the night but would be up and about by lunchtime, only a day or 2 before they anticipated Zabuz's return and attack on the bridge. A cool, collected voice said, "Want to tell me something now?" Why you fucking crazy?" a scared voice said. One of the would-be robbers was hanging upside down from the ceiling over a steel cage, which contained 5 Rottweilers that were snarling and growling. Over the snarl, the voice said, "I'm waiting." "Not him, please, not him!" The thief sobbed as he turned to face the man who was standing to the side, close to the rope, holding a knife. He began to scream again. "Please, I don't know anything. All I was told was to kidnap the bridge builder's family with 2 other guys while Zabuza attacked the bridge. I don't know where Gato's main base is." When Naruto asked, cocking his head slightly to the side as he glanced at the man without emotion. He looked at the devil and stammered, Tea the day after tomorrow, hoping the knowledge was sufficient to be dismissed. To himself, Nuda remained silent for a moment before turning to go. The man hanging over the group of dogs said, Hey, what about me? Oh, sorry, I forgot about you for a second, Nuda said to the man as he snapped out of his reverie, then swung the blade and cut the rope. Nuda turned on his heel and left the room, disregarding the man who was screaming as the 5 demon dogs tore him to pieces. The day after tomorrow, huh? Nuda thought of the man with the large sword and grinned menacingly. Sounds like fun. As he left, he pasted the holding cell containing his final prisoner, the one he had stabbed with the dango stick. He had just killed the second, and the third, lucky or unlucky, was lying on the cot unconscious after he threw the chair at him and snapped his neck. He entered the lab section after leaving the prison area and paused in front of a huge glass tube. He put his hands on the heavy glass tank and looked at the beast inside. Soon, my creation, the time for your awakening will be at hand, and I shall summon you so that you may serve your purpose. Battle on the bridge is a time skip. If he hadn't stopped to kill the 2 who were attempting to kidnap the bridge builder's daughter, he would have arrived sooner to witness the Uchiha get his ass handed to him by the masked ninja who worked for Zabuza. Nerdo stood atop the sign at the completed end of the bridge, looking into the mist that covered the unfinished end. He could see through the thick mist easily thanks to his eyes, but he couldn't help but feel a little let down for not arriving sooner. He turned his attention to the other genin, and saw that half of them were defending Tizuna, while the others were engaged in a losing struggle with the water clones and the masked ninja. He turned away from them and turned to face the jonin. The spirit art mistress was left sitting against the side rails close to the genin, unable to fight, but still conscious. Enko was sweating and appeared exhausted, with water all around and covering her, as she lay next to her friend. If Nuda had to guess, he would say that Zabuza sent a small army of water clones to battle her while he was fighting the 6th headmaster. The 6th headmaster was still engaged in combat. His clothes were ripped in several places, his headband was missing, and his silver hair hung limply over his face and to the sides due to the moisture. Nuda narrowed his eyes and watched like a hawk. The 6th headmaster appeared too familiar, the way he used spirit arts, no matter how minor, at every opportunity and skillfully sidestepped any significant attack that came his way. He looked away from the battle and searched his memory to see what he was forgetting. The sound of 1,000 birds chirping suddenly reached his ears, and as he quickly glanced back at the fight, he realized what he had forgotten. That motherfucker, he muttered, glaring at the 6th headmaster. Making sure not to conceal his existence, Nuda moved away from the sign and crept slowly into the mist. Greetings, 6th headmaster, or should I say Genko, he said, stepping closer and casually embracing with his arms outstretched to the side. Even Zabuza and the masked ninja watched in bewilderment as the 6th headmaster froze and everyone else paused to consider what was happening. Fringing ignorance, the 6th headmaster gave Nuda a perplexed glance and asked, Who? Don't play with me, 6th headmaster. I've always been suspicious of there being a spy in Leaf, but to think that Genko was the spy. Nuda began to walk away. As everyone watched in disbelief, Sakura summarized everyone's sentiments by asking, Wait, what are you going on about? Genko, or rather 6th headmaster here, was my second in command when Leaf was first started, Nuda said, causing everyone to appear surprised. He turned to face the group after turning to face the 6th headmaster. The 6th headmaster lost his bewildered expression when he realized he couldn't pull it off. It had to be done, Nerdo. Hokage-sama wanted to make sure that you didn't do something stupid, he said. Like what? Nerdo tilted his head to the side. Abandon the village that left me so long ago? He asked. Although it was true that the 6th headmaster remained mute, Nerdo's statement made it sound worse than it actually was. The sixth headmaster began. Nerdo, you have to understand, people need time to get over their grief dash, but was interrupted by the blonde. 14 goddamn years, I think that they've had long enough, and I'm done putting up with their shit. A great cloud of smoke engulfed Nerdo, and no one moved. Sixth headmaster, you were my best man, so I will leave you to test out my newest summon, Nerdo said, echoing from the cloud. The beast that emerged from the cloud, with its grayish-white skin, enormous claws, one pupilless eye, and a large heart on his chest that was still beating, had everyone gasping in fear. With Kiba standing guard in front of her, a scared Hinata stammered, What is that? Nerdo's disembodied voice said, I call it Tyrant, he's the ultimate soldier. One that knows no fear, no suffering, and no pity. Unfortunately, he isn't flawless. He is merely a prototype that will soon pass away without the aid of life support systems. He can play with you for 7 minutes until he passes away, and by then, I will have all the knowledge I require. Unexpectedly, the beast charged at Sixth Headmaster and Zabuza with unexpected speed. This would turn out to be the most difficult battle of their lives. Everyone was so absorbed in the battle that nobody but Kurenai noticed Nerdo appear by ankle and grab her before jumping a short distance away. They watched in horror as the terrible monstrosity known as Tyrant battled both Sixth Headmaster and Zabuza, keeping them both on the defensive and gradually winning. So have you thought about my offer? Nerdo murmured gently as he landed just out of hearing distance from the altercation. He watched as Anko spun around in a defensive position. Anko relaxed her posture and said to him, Oh Nerdo-kun, you scared me. Nerdo gave her a weird look and raised an eyebrow before posing the question. Who else could it be? She asked, protruding her chest and making a seductive position. Well, who wouldn't want to get their hands on this body? Anko, I want you to join me and become what I've become. I want you to follow me as I recreate this world where people like you and me can walk through the village and not have to worry about being attacked or looked down upon for being different, Nerdo said, shaking his head and shedding perspiration at her childishness. You want to destroy the world, Anko said, stepping away from him as her expression swiftly changed to one of dread. Humanity is getting closer to its own demise every day, he whispered to her. I'm not destroying the world, I'm just saving it. Please, Anko-chan, I really want you to stay with me. I want to share the power I have with you, he said, taking a step forward after seeing she was still not persuaded. How are you certain that I won't become one of those things? She referred to Tyrant when she asked him. Remember that day 2 years ago, when you were in the hospital due to blood loss and required a blood transfusion? Nerdo asked her as he moved closer. She rubbed her forearm and winced at the memory. She had been working on a new spirit art when she made a mistake that resulted in a huge explosion that sent her through a tree, giving her a huge gash on her arm and back. She woke up later in the hospital hooked up to a bunch of machines and in need of a blood transfusion. Sadly, her reputation as the snake bitch didn't draw any blood donors to help her, but the one mysterious person who brought her in did. Due to patient-doctor confidentiality, neither she nor the doctor disclosed the incident to anybody in High Ninja Village. Then it dawned on her. It was you! She gasped. You were the one who saved me. Nerdo replied. Yes, Anko-chan, I was the one who brought you in and donated my blood to you dash. Anko interrupted him by putting her arms around him and pressing her face into his coat. After patting her back and cautiously putting his arms around her, Nerdo said, I've always watched over you, Anko-chan. After a brief pause. The best thing that could ever happen to me would be for you to join me and share my dream because we both understand each other's agony, and I truly like you. Anko decided to follow the boy. No, join the only man who cared about her, after clenching his coat and nodding into it. A huge roar reverberated across the bridge, jolting both out of their reverie. After putting a hand inside her coat pocket without her noticing and releasing her, he said, "Wait for me, Anko," before vanishing entirely. Seems as if Sixth Headmaster couldn't beat Tyrant before his time ran out. The Sixth Headmaster sighed with exhaustion as he gazed at the body of the enormous monster that he and Zabuza had to battle. He and the swordsman had their work cut out for them. The tyrant was a juggernaut on the field, never flinching or feeling any pain when a flame or Zabuza's sword sliced into it. The only reason they had won was because it began to weaken over time and eventually died when the 7 minutes were up and its heart simply stopped beating. Not wishing to faint from exhaustion of core energy, he took his headband out of his pocket, put it on, and covered his eye. Then they heard someone clapping. "Good job, Sixth Headmaster." Zabuza and the Sixth Headmaster turned to see Naruto standing a few feet away, clapping softly. "I didn't even sense him," they both thought. "You truly were my best soldier, Sixth Headmaster. Too bad the others weren't smart enough to use a shadow clone on that day," he thought. The Sixth Headmaster snarled, saying that even though he wasn't close to any of the other Leaf members, they were still allies, so how could he talk about them as though they were nothing? The words, "Too bad you have outlived your usefulness, Zabuza, you could have made a great soldier or at least a good test subject," were spoken before Naruto vanished in a black blur. When Zabuza turned, he was struck in the face by a black-gloved fist, which caused him to fall to the ground and roll 10 feet back. The masked ninja yelled, "Zabuza-sama!" in shock before hurling a barrage of ice needles at the blonde. When Naruto saw this, he began to weave in and out of the way, vanishing and resurfacing like a black blur as he moved in the direction of the ninja. When he finally got to the ninja, he struck the ninja's face with his fist and made contact with the mask, only to have it transform into a pool of water. Seeing the shattered pieces of the mask, he thought to himself, "Substitution with a water clone? How clever! You can't run from me, Ninja-san, you're merely postponing the inevitable," he screamed. He smiled malevolently as he saw the blur approaching Zabuza, saying, There you are." Haku swore as he had to leap away to avoid the blonde monster's black-gloved fist. He managed to dodge Naruto's boot from kicking his head, but he was unable to avoid the sweep kick that followed. He hit his head on the stone floor and felt his world fade in and out of darkness until another black object struck his face, sending him into an endless darkness. Zabuza's eyes widened as he saw how effortlessly this blond man defeated and killed his weapon. He stammered, What is that?" to the Sixth Headmaster, who was waiting for him. "Naruto, Hyde Ninja Village's greatest hero, greatest mistake, and now worst enemy," the Sixth Headmaster said after glancing at him. A syringe with interchangeable tubes at the end and 2 other tubes appeared in his hand with a puff of smoke as Naruto rolled up his coat sleeve to reveal multiple ceiling tattoos. He looked at the now dead boy lying at his feet and cursed that he had crushed the boy's brain, rendering it useless in an experiment. Both men were perplexed as Naruto inserted the needle into the boy's neck, filled all 3 tubes with blood, sealed them in his arm, and got to his feet. After saying, "Now that that's taken care of, I can focus on you," Naruto sent a large wave of core energy through the air, blowing all the mist away, leaving everyone staring at him in shock and confusion. He nodded toward the end of the bridge and said, "Now that that is out of the way, I have one last thing to take care of before I can play with you." A short man in a suit was in front of the army of armed men near the end of the unfinished bridge, and everyone silently gasped as they gazed at them. Seeing the dead boy's body, Gato stepped up and kicked him, saying, "Too bad this little prick died, I wanted to teach him a lesson myself." "So the demon was beaten by the devil, a child no less, how pathetic," he said, making everyone behind him laugh. Naruto gave the man an impassive glance before calling forth his demon dogs, which had grown to 15, and causing smoke to fill a portion of the bridge. The idea of another tyrant made the Leaf Ninjas pale, but they were a little comforted when, rather than a massive, man-like creature, there were a number of gigantic, disgusting dogs that were all foaming at the mouth and snarling at the men. He said, "Attack," in a strong voice that cut through the growls. Abruptly, the dogs charged ahead and began slaughtering the sizable crowd. Anko appeared next to her closest buddy as Naruto eventually passed the astonished group of Genin and Jonin. "Kurenai, are you okay?" she checked her over and inquired. "Yeah, I'm fine. How about you?" "I saw him take you." Kurenai nodded. She was stopped by Anko, who waved her away, saying, "It's nothing to worry about." Kurenai gave her a strange look, but she nodded nonetheless. Her eyes widened as she looked out over the bridge. Zabuza and Gato had just fallen hundreds of feet below into the water due to Zabuza's rage, while Naruto was looking over the edge with his arms crossed. She wasn't concerned about that. Instead, she was concerned about Kiba's attempt to kill Naruto. "Kiba, don't!" she screamed. Kiba was only 5 feet away when Naruto whirled around and grabbed him by the neck, sensing that the dog kid was running toward him with the intent to kill. Naruto lifted himself off the ground and kicked Kiba's dog away, saying, "You think that I would fall to such a pathetic attack?" He turned to the edge of the bridge and threw Kiba over. And oh! Naruto's eyes widened as the water's surface drew closer and closer, and he let his training take over, bringing his arms up to his face and bracing himself as something struck him hard in the back and wrapped around his waist, knocking him off balance and forcing him to release Kiba before he went over the edge, taking whatever was holding him along. Everything became quiet. "Hinata!" Kurenai cried as she saw her younger sister figure plummeting from the bridge. Anko saw a massive splash of water and no bodies when she screamed, and Ardeo, and leaped to her feet, sliding to the edge before reaching for the blonde in a hopeless attempt to save him. She clenched her hand and sobbed in her head. "No! No! No, 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 no!" Her tears flowed from the bridge and into the sea below. The words, "Wait for me, Anko," replayed in her head.